The recording going on my same screen at the same time makes it a little tricky, but we'll see how we go. Okay, in 5 minutes. In New South Wales, so first of all, we're building on the efforts of a whole bunch of other people. But what we're first of all trying to do is, as a public service, so we are, the New South Wales government, we're looking at the fact that whenever we try to do service delivery, whenever we're trying to provide services, public sector services to the public, which could be anything from, registering your car to paying taxes, when you try to bring those rules together into citizen-centric services, it's complex. It's all over the place. There are rules across lots of different departments, across different jurisdictions. It's increasingly complex, and every time a new piece of legislation or regulation, or indeed operating rules, operating policy rules, are introduced into the mix, it's only making an exponential, change and increase in complexity and speed of that impact. So what we're trying to do is look at how we can make our public sector fit for purpose for the 21st century. That means a full transformation and change journey, not just around rules as code, which I'll talk about today, but around everything: how we draft, how we do policy, how we do implementation, how we do everything. So rules as code has come about as a collaboration between policy, tech, and design. It's bringing together multidisciplinary teams to look at the problem of how we bring rules together and use them better and make them available better. So the problems we're trying to solve broadly. The rules are very complex and they're very hard. I've got a lot of detail in these slides only so that people can look at them later. But there's also unintended consequences when there's changes to the rules, and those changes happen all the time. There's currently issues around conflicting rules that are not always obvious until you try to do implementation, and so the policy and rules owners and drafters are not always aware of the difficulty of integrating those rules, whether it's by a government department or whether it's by someone external to government trying to consume the rules. There's a consistency and a gap in the implementation of rules into software, which is inevitable. The moment you have rules and you have to apply them, then someone's going to be applying them in software at some point, which of course creates a huge wasted effort in people having to do that work continually. So our thinking is if we could make them the rules of government, human and machine, discoverable and consumable, we can more efficiently apply those rules across society. And of course, our focus is on service delivery, and our secondary focus is on regulation itself. So, what is RAC? What are rules as code? For us, it's about the rules from legislation, regulation, and policy, and changing them into, and not just changing them into, but producing human and machine consumable rules. So we're originally focused on service delivery. We're looking at prescriptive rules, not judgment-based. Having said that, even for judgment-based rules, the ability to say, well, let's figure out if you meet the compliance tests first, and if you do, now a test is required. For instance, you might be eligible for citizenship, but a good judgment of your character is required as part of that session, as part of that application. But there's no point going to have that interview unless you know you're eligible anyway. Edge cases can be potentially codified over time is one of the realizations that come up, and there's an opportunity to collaborate with the people who are in charge of the rules. In our case, it's the Parliamentary Council's office, but also we have better regulation, all the regulators across government as well. And we in New South Wales have a better regulation division, specifically looking at how to transform rules into the future. So the key cases we're looking at are eligibility and calculation engines, regulation, and triggers to defer to judgment. Benefits, I probably don't need to say so much to this group, but fundamentally it's about better policy outcomes, making sure that your implementation actually meets the original intended outcome, better modelling, better consistency of application, faster deployment, and probably because in our case we're very specifically talking about the rules of government and the rules of the public sector, I think for me the biggest opportunity is that this creates greater public trust. If you can have your rules as code and then have public testing, public regression testing of those rules, then you have a greater opportunity for traceability, transparency, and of course appellability, the ability for people to appeal a decision made by government or on the basis of government rules. What it isn't structured content, as was mentioned, but it's also we're not trying to build an AI to do this. We're not trying to automate the translation of rules into into code. we're actually trying to shift how we draft rules in the first place to draft human and machine consumable rules from the start. And of course, your mind immediately says, well, what about all the existing rules? And the simple answer is we're trying to draw that line in the sand so that we change how we work moving forward, and then we work backwards according to high value rules that need to be translated. Excuse me, it's very early in Australia. So the status quo, we take rules, people then interpret it in many different ways, and then they apply it in many different ways. Lots of problems with that. That exists today. People think that doing rules as code is creating a new problem. It's actually trying to address a substantial problem we currently have. Huge props to Nadia. The attribution source on this is actually on the bottom of the slide, which doesn't show on the thing here. But thank you, Nadia Webster, for this, and to the New Zealanders for all the work they've done, which we're building on very much in New South Wales. But it takes a long time to deliver impact and create flexibility in how rules are developed through to how they're actually consumed. Future steps, we're looking at really. Oh, okay. So very quickly, our next steps. How this will change things. We're drawing a line in the sand, better regulation, drafting, and we're trying to get greater accountability and public trust in public institutions. There you go. And all this is available to us.